Hello, gentle viewers. This is Indian, welcoming you to what could be the final episode of the Out of the Park Baseball tutorial series. Today, we're going to be talking about baseball history, how the game of baseball has evolved since it began, and where it even might be going in the future. To begin with, let's address the Major League Baseball History Index that you see before you. In 1871, the National League did not exist. The National League's official foundation was 1876. The only reason that there's anything here is because there are a few players that have been credited with playing Major League Baseball prior to the foundation of the National League. So it's not super important for our records or for our understanding, but that's why it goes back to 1871 in the index, even though there were no leagues at that time. At least no major leagues. So, Major League Baseball, or baseball, supposedly was developed by a man named Abner Doubleday, who would later go on to become a Civil War general. Although different legends say different things. Maybe he invented it before the Civil War, maybe he invented it after the Civil War. They all seem to credit him with it. And supposedly the very first pro baseball team was in Cooperstown, New York, which is why the Hall of Fame is there. In all reality, baseball is derived from an English game called Rounders, which still exists today in England, but it's, as I understand it, generally considered a game for girls, like softball is in the United States. It's certainly never developed in England. There was an NFL Europe. There's never been an MLB Europe. Baseball is far more popular in the Western Hemisphere than it ever has been in the Eastern Hemisphere, with the sole exception of Japan and Korea and Taiwan to a lesser extent. Asian cultures, for whatever reason, seem to love baseball. I don't know why that is. And that's beyond my expertise when it comes to baseball. So 1876 marks the foundation of the National League. And in 1876... there were, I believe, 8 teams. Of these 8 teams, almost none of them still exist. The Chicago White Stockings confusingly became the Chicago Cubs. The St. Louis Brown Stockings might have become the Cardinals. The Hartford Dark Blues disappeared. The Boston Red Caps disappeared. Louisville Grays disappeared. The Philadelphia Athletics and the Cincinnati Reds still exist as well. The Philadelphia Athletics moved twice. First from Philadelphia to Kansas City, then from Kansas City to Oakland. So if we look at teams here, it'll tell us for sure. This is actually not true. The St. Louis Cardinals were not the St. Louis Browns. They were different teams. Yeah, the Cardinals and the Browns are different teams. The Browns were in the American League. But I think actually there were 2 teams called the St. Louis Browns, if I'm not mistaken. That's the only way that would explain it that I can think of. Because the St. Louis Browns became the Baltimore Orioles later on. But I'll take it back. The Boston Red Caps became the Atlanta Braves. Another team that moved around quite a bit. There's the Philadelphia Athletics, who moved to Columbus in our version of the league. And I believe that's it. Of the original National League team, that's all that remains. And for a long time, the National League was the only game in town. In the very first creation of baseball, there were 9 balls and 4 strikes. Until later on, it changed. The mound used to be quite a bit closer to home plate. Again, that moved out just a bit, and other things happened. By and large, the game of baseball that was played in 1876 is superficially similar to the one today. But this is where context comes in, and it's so important. In 1876, the game of baseball was played without gloves, Fielders did not have gloves. Almost none of the pitches that currently exist had been invented. The fastball existed, the curveball existed. Maybe some people argue the changeup existed. But that would probably be about it. Pitchers threw a lot softer, and hitters hit a lot less hard. So if we take a look at the stats for 1876, a few things will leap out at us. There were 40 home runs in the entire league. And although I don't believe out-of-the-park baseball makes a distinction, I would be willing to bet that all but 4 or 5 of those was an inside-the-park home run. You'll notice runs per game is very high, but batting averages are very low. This is, again, because of the bad defense. Defense was really, really bad in these days. It was just terrible. We don't have any leaderboards. OOTP, I don't believe, keeps the statistics going back that far. It does for individual players, but it doesn't for... Click on batting register, there's nothing there. It keeps track of league records, but that's all it keeps track of. So we click on Cincinnati Reds, for example. It won't tell us who was on their team. Just a couple of people, like Luis Esparza, who I'm pretty sure didn't actually exist at the time. Right. So you'll notice run scores were fairly high, especially for a short season. Runs allowed were comparatively slightly lower. This was a game in which defense was terrible. Look at this. The league scored a .321 slugging percentage. The league. If you have a .321 slugging percentage in Major League Baseball, you'd better be the greatest shortstop to play in history. Because otherwise you're not sticking on a Major League team. Or you could be a pitcher, I guess. That's just the way baseball used to be. A lot of hits, very few for extra bases. And most of the hits that even were for extra bases were doubles. Some triples, almost no home runs. Here we've got some more information about actual players. Like Cap Anson, for example. So here's some information here for those of you who care. Okay. We're not going to go over every year in Major League history, but there's a reason why the 19th century is called the dead ball era. Home runs didn't happen. There's lots of reasons for that. There's bad defense. In fact, players weren't particularly strong. The ball wasn't thrown particularly hard, and both of these things together are what gets to the home run totals of today. Okay. So Major League history continues apace. The National League playing its games each year. Some years are better than others. If we look at 1894, the league ERA was .532. We take a quick look at that. More home runs as a team. Wait, that can't be right, can it? Who the hell had more than... Jimmy Bannon and Hugh Duffy both had quite a few home runs. So did Tommy McCarthy. I'm not positive this is right. Maybe it's right. That there would be that many home runs back in 1894. Again, these could be inside the park home runs. And we have no way of confirming that. But it's worth considering that for the longest time, the all-time home run leader had like 100 home runs. The first giant change in baseball history came when the then American Association was adopted as another major league, creating the two major league model we have today. The American League was formally created as an opposition of the National League, and they right away moved into some of the biggest major league cities. So, for example, Chicago got another team. Boston got another team. Philadelphia got another team. Baltimore got a team they didn't have before. Washington got a team. This was a very deliberate decision to pick all these teams, and look where the very biggest teams were here. Philadelphia. Boston, Chicago. There was no New York team. No, I'm sorry. There was a New York team in 1901, wasn't there? No, that's right. The New York team came later. The New York team came later. And so some people call this the league era of baseball. This is when we start to see more people. But again, note the dead ball stats. Plenty of doubles, a fair number of triples, very few homers. Very few homers. I don't know, do we have a batting register? We do. So the home run champion was Nap Lajoie, who hit 14. Nap Lajoie was an amazing player. As you can see, he was a Hall of Famer. It's really hard to argue that a player who only hit 14 home runs today would be considered great unless he was just a brilliant defensive player. Okay. So the World Series began in 1903. They skipped in 1904 for interesting reasons that a baseball history book will tell you. Basically, the American League and National League had a spat, and it ended up leading to the major leagues having an agreement, and they played the World Series every year until 1994. Up until the 1920s, we're still in what's called the dead ball era. Home runs are very, very rare. If you do see a home run, it's going to be an inside the park home run. Defenses weren't great. Pitchers didn't throw that hard. But something has started to happen in the 1920s. And the obvious solution to the problem has always been, it's Babe Ruth. We can't talk about the history of baseball without talking about Babe Ruth. So let's take a look. No, I actually wanted the 1924 Yankees, or 1921 Yankees, because it was the first year that he was on there. Note, by the way, some of the American League teams we've all grown to know and love. The Cleveland Indians, New York Yankees, Washington Senators, who were now the Minnesota Twins. Right? Yeah, the Twins came first. Boston Red Sox, Tigers, White Sox, Philadelphia Athletics, all there. Let's see here. Here's Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth was a major league freak. He did something no one before him had ever done, which is hit home runs. And lots of homers. In 1918, he had 11 home runs, playing for the then Boston Braves, who would later move. A big part of baseball history is that two of the oldest rivalry in professional sports is in Major League Baseball between the Boston Red Sox and the New York Yankees. Even though Babe Ruth never played for the Red Sox, he played for the. No, I'm sorry. He played for the Red Sox. He didn't play for the Braves till the end of his career. That shows you how dumb I am. But he was originally known as a pitcher, and a really good pitcher. And they decided, he's a good pitcher. He's an amazing hitter. He's absolutely bloody brilliant. And then everything started to take off. So getting back to the Red Sox-Yankees thing. The Boston Red Sox were going through some difficult times. The Red Sox owner needed money, and so he sold Babe Ruth to the Yankees. There's more to it than that, but that's the big thing. And then for a very long time, Boston won no World Series championships until 2004. Was it the Red Sox or the Patriots that won in 2004? I'm going to look it up. I'll look it up here in a second. Here's the key. Babe Ruth led the league in home runs from 1919 to 1931 every year except for twice. In 1925 and 1922. If we go to the 1922 American League, let's see who led the league in home runs. So 1922... league leader in home runs was Ken Williams of the St. Louis Browns. Babe Ruth was a paltry third. So this is why some people say, oh my God, it was Babe Ruth. It's not. Lots and lots and lots of people are hitting home runs that were not hitting home runs before. The biggest piece of speculation is that they changed the way the baseball was made so that the center was made of rubber instead of just cork, and that this made the ball fly farther and faster than it ever had before. Regardless of why, home runs became much more common. Much more common. And this is one of the first big changes in Major League history. We started to see power become much more popular. And you'll notice ERAs will start to dip. ERAs start to hover around the 4 mark, especially in the American League. The National League takes a little bit longer to catch up, but here again we're seeing lots of ERAs in the 4s. This is all because of the live ball era. Get it? Dead ball, live ball. So players from this era tended to hit a lot of home runs. That didn't mean they were great hitters. It meant they hit a lot of home runs. Some people like Babe Ruth were both. So let's take a look. When did the Boston Red Sox win the World Series? Oh, I was right. It was 2004. Whew. Okay. And so things continued, and baseball's popularity exploded. William Howard Taft was the first president to throw a ball up first pitch out while he was president, and now it's common. It happens with every president, sometimes several times in their presidencies, depending on how much they like baseball. Not every president likes baseball. I think they should. I think it should be mandatory. But, whatever. But one of the things that starts to disappear around this exact same time is the 400 hitter. Hitters begin to purposely stop swinging to hit for contact and start swinging for the fences. So batting averages tend to dip just a bit. You'll notice the league here is hitting 300. I wonder if, I always learn new things about this year. I wonder if the leaderboards go by year. Because I want to show you guys what a home run champion looked like before Babe Ruth. And how just ridiculous it was. We could look at single season home runs. That's as good a way as any. But no, it doesn't look like... We'd have to literally go through every single one. And I just don't think it's worth it. So let's scroll down until we find a player who played before Babe Ruth. Scrolling. Yep, 49 home runs in a season has been done 81 times. That's single game records. That's not helpful. This doesn't list the whole history of league evolution. It just changes things. Oh, I did not want to click on Baseball Hall of Fame. Anyway, the important point is that before Babe Ruth, Bobby Abreu, we might talk about the Hall of Fame today. I don't know if we will or not, but we might. Let's see. History. Here we go. What was his bloody name? I think Roger Connors. No? I'm blanking on his last name. In any case, home runs were super, super rare, and then they weren't. And it was because they changed the baseball. Players started using gloves. Defenses started getting better. Batting averages were still somewhat high, but it was more about power than it was about hitting for average. The 1920s and the early 30s were just an insane time for offense. The entire National League hit 303 in 1930. Teams had lots of home runs. Oh, they do have it in here. Yes. So Babe Ruth's first really big year was 1919. If we look at 1918, American League, home runs. Babe Ruth led the league with 11. If we pick another year, like let's say 1904, the American League home run leader hit 8 home runs. 8. This just goes to show you exactly how much the game of baseball has changed. Also in the 20s and 30s, batting averages were super crazy high. Let's look at a player like 336 isn't that impressive for Paul Wainer. Paul Wainer is actually a really good underrated hitter, unlike Lloyd Wainer, who was actually much worse, but they both ended up in the Hall of Fame. Here we go, the 31 Cardinals, the Gas House Gang. This should have Rogers Hornsby. Maybe not. 349. If we look at a different method, let's look at all-time batting average. And you'll notice how many of them cluster in the 19th and early 20th century. And most of these are empty batting averages. A lot of these are singles. Hugh Duffy, 440. Rogers Hornsby, 1924. 400, hitting 400 was not super common. I mean, in the entire history of baseball, only 18 batters have ever hit it, and a lot of people did it many times. Rogers Hornsby did it 3 times. Ty Cobb did it 3 times. George Sisler did it twice. Ed Delahanty did it 3 times. I mean, these are all very common baseball names, and they're all Hall of Famers. The only player to hit 400 that never made the Hall of Fame was Shoeless Joe Jackson. And that's because of what happened in 1919. In 1919, the Chicago White Sox threw the World Series. In other words, they lost on purpose. Because most of the team players on the Chicago White Sox had in fact taken bribes from gamblers. Shoeless Joe Jackson allegedly did not want to take the money, but he did anyway. And it totally changed baseball because baseball started playing very strict rules about whether it was okay or not okay to gamble. And they said you can't gamble on your own team, you can't gamble against your own team, it's illegal. And there's been some pretty serious consequences. But notice how many of these high averages come before the live ball era. The 1920s is really when the live ball era starts. But a lot of these are 19th century early teens. And that's just the way baseball was. So the last player to hit 400 was Ted Williams in 1941. No one has come close since then. I take that back. Tony Gwynn hit like 385, I want to say. Where's Tony Gwynn? Rod Carew at 388 in 1977. Was that 1994? There was the other Tony Gwynn hit like 380 and he was actually hitting 400 until the last couple weeks of the season. Maybe it's this year. Maybe it was 371. Yeah, Tony Gwynn was actually hitting 400 for a while. So it was still a rare achievement, but now it just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen at all. Okay. So up until 1947, things stay kind of the same. Pitching starts to catch back up in the late 30s and early 40s, and that's because of little thing called World War II. A lot of major league players, and this happened in the 1914 through 18 for World War I too. But a lot of major league baseball players fought in World War II. Some of them just went for like USO tours and stuff like that. Morale and such. But some of them went and fought. Ted Williams was a test pilot. Bob Feller was a gunner on a Navy ship. He might have been a gunner's mate, but I forget his actual position. But he actually fought on a ship. There's lots of other examples, too, of people that fought during World War II. And so actually it became a lot easier to pitch and a lot harder to hit. Because most of the best hitters in the majors had left. And it took them a while to recover. But 1947 is a huge year for Major League Baseball. because of one man, Jackie Robinson. Prior to 1947, with two exceptions, African Americans or black or dark-skinned players of any race, to be honest with you, were not allowed to play Major League Baseball. There wasn't a rule against it. It was disgustingly called a gentleman's agreement that they would not sign black players. This is why the Negro Leagues were a thing in the first place. Because lots of black men wanted to play baseball. It was America's most popular sport. And they were told, you can't play the game at the highest level. And so legends like Luke Easter, Josh Gibson, Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, all these brilliant players either didn't get to play in the majors, or by the time they got to play in the majors, they were already quite old. And it's a real shame. But so when someone tells you that someone like Barry Bonds is a terrible person because he used steroids, which he was never formally accused of, you can say, okay, maybe he cheapened the game of baseball a little bit. What about the baseball owners that wouldn't let black players play? Babe Ruth never faced a black pitcher in a major league game. They did barnstorming tours where the best white players would play the best black players. Unfortunately, the best black players, not in a general sense, but unfortunately for these white owners that wanted to stop this from happening, the black players won a lot. And a lot of the white players, to their credit, including Babe Ruth, said, let's play them. And they said no. So Babe Ruth never faced a black player in his entire life. A lot of players didn't. Some of the very best Hall of Famers never faced a black player. And if you look today at Major League Baseball, a very sizable percentage of all major players are black or dark-skinned Latinos. And they weren't allowed to play in the game either. If you were a Cuban, your only chance of playing Major League Baseball was to be light-skinned, where you could pass for white. It's just the way the system worked. But in 1947, Branch Rickey decides he's going to bring Jackie Robinson to the major leagues. And Jackie Robinson is just amazing. Super amazing. I believe Jackie Robinson won the MVP that year. Maybe he didn't. He was Rookie of the Year for sure. Do you list the awards here? No, it's in a different thing here. What were the awards in 47? It doesn't list Rookie of the Year? What? Oh, yeah, it's just American League Award winners. Yeah, Jackie Robinson, 1947. I don't know why they don't have his stats there. So there he is, Rookie of the Year. 1949 MVP. Brooklyn Dodgers won the World Series with him. And it changed everything. It took a long time for the major leagues to become fully integrated. The first American League team, no coincidence, was my Cleveland Indians, who the following year signed Larry Doby to a major league deal. And they won the World Series. And then lots of other teams started hiring black people until the Boston Red Sox, who took till 1964 for their first black player. But we tend to call 1947 the beginning of the integration era. I said with two caveats. Moses and Fleetwood Walker actually played Major League Baseball and were black in the 19th century. I don't know if their names will be included here. It probably won't because it's not technically considered a major league. They played in they played professional baseball, but not in the National League. But after that was it. They were it. After 1947, we enter the integration era. The game starts to change again with all this new talent being added. Athletes get better and better, and it shifts back again toward offense. You'll notice during the late 30s, early 40s, starts to dip toward pitching. That starts to change again as black players start to enter the game. More and more players start swinging for power. Up until 1968, which we call the Year of the Pitcher. It was called the Year of the Pitcher. There was another one like 4 or 5 years ago. And 1968 is also an important year because the year before, we get to the point where we start to talk about free agency because of a man named Curt Flood. Curt Flood played for the St. Louis Cardinals. And Curt Flood was traded, and he did not want to be traded to the Philadelphia, I believe the Philadelphia Phillies at the time. Let's look up Curt Flood just so you can see him. His statistics are by no means impressive. He was a good player, but he wasn't like a brilliant player or anything like that. But what matters is he got traded, and he said, I don't want to play. I would rather... Sorry, it happened in 1970. He said, I would rather not play Major League Baseball than play for Philadelphia. The Cardinals won't... I want to stay in St. Louis, and the Philadelphia Phillies, whoever they try to trade him to, won't give me what I'm worth. He challenged the reserve clause in court, and he lost. But other players kept challenging it, and finally in 1972 the reserve clause disappeared, and we get the free agency system we know today. A lot of people, and I'm included, believe that Curt Flood should be in the Hall of Fame. Not because he was a great baseball player, but because he totally changed the game. If Curt Flood hadn't had the courage to say, I would rather not play the season than play for a contract that insults my value, we might not be talking about these big contracts. Another thing, and this infuriates me, those of you that might follow the Baseball Hall of Fame know that Jack Morris and Alan Trammell both got voted in. Alan Trammell was a good choice. Jack Morris wasn't. And we don't have to talk about that right now. But I do want to talk about another man that was really important, Marvin Miller. Marvin Miller was the first head of the Players Union, and he got them free agency. The fact that Major League Baseball players make millions of dollars today is because of men like Curt Flood and Marvin Miller, neither of whom are in the Hall of Fame, and neither of whom get the proper recognition they deserve. For the baseball players today to become millionaires and to have all these wonderful opportunities is because of this. And they should be far more grateful than they are. And it blows my mind that any player would not vote for Marvin Miller for the Hall of Fame. Curt Flood, you can make an argument. Curt Flood's home Major League career was nothing superb. He was very good, but he wasn't great. He just wasn't that great. He decided, I want to get paid what I'm worth, and the rest is history. I don't know if it lists his salary here. They don't keep track of salary back then. That's understandable. And so this is a big era in baseball history. It's also a big era, the late 1960s, because we start to see more and more teams added to the league. Beginning in 1962. In 1962, let's see here. The Minnesota Twins were added. They did not exist before 1962. And I believe that's also the year that the Angels were added. No, the Twins were not an expansion team. The Twins were the old Senators. Who's the other bloody team that was added in 1962 in the American League? Let's take a look at the team index. The Houston Astros, but the Houston Colt 45s were in the National League. Oh, I'm sorry, the Angels were added in 61. And then, the second Washington Senators were added in 1961. That was the other team. I apologize. The LA Angels and the other team were there. In the National League in 1962, you also get two more teams. The Houston Colt 45s, the modern-day Houston Astros. People decided, let's maybe not name them after a gun. And the New York Mets. And this begins what we sometimes call the expansion era. Because Major League Baseball starts adding teams left and right. If we take a look at the teams here, we see a lot of old teams. We see like the Arizona Diamondbacks added in 98. Rockies added in 93. Astros are talking about Kansas City added in 69. Milwaukee Brewers added in 69. San Diego Padres added in 1969. The new Washington Nationals added in 1969. In the late 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s, teams were added all the time. I remember being, not quite in high school, but I remember when the Colorado Rockies joined the major leagues, and they were the most popular thing imaginable for a while. Everyone loved the Colorado Rockies. What this meant is, as there were more teams, the overall talent level on any given team got diluted. And so, baseball in the 60s and 70s, you don't see the offensive numbers you're used to. The pitchers start to kind of regain things. And then the 80s start to happen, and they start to shift back again. 1994, there was no World Series because of a strike. The players went on strike, and there was no World Series, which is a shame. But they did what they thought was right. And I can't fault them too terribly much for that. I lied. And it's 47, the Dodgers don't win the World Series, the Yankees did. I try to block that from my memory because the Yankees win too many bloody World Series. But that's neither here nor there. The expansion eras where we see a lot of new teams added, a lot of players get new chances, but things start to shift back in favor of hitting. And again, you'll see averages start to creep up. You'll see power numbers start to creep up. They'll take a brief dip in the 80s, and then in the 90s, they start spiking. Some people uncharitably call this the steroid era. I have some unfortunate news for you if you believe in the purity of baseball. Baseball players have been using drugs as long as there has been baseball. In the past, it was alcohol. Some of them did things like cocaine. Doc Ellis, a pitcher for the Pittsburgh Pirates, threw a no-hitter while on LSD. Steroids go back at least since the 20s. Methamphetamines were extremely popular in the 60s and 70s. So to sit there and draw this ridiculous line in the sand, it's okay if a baseball player does cocaine, but God help you if you use steroids. It's just so obscene to me. It's so absurd. And so many players did it in Major League history that I think it's silly to call it the steroid era. I like calling it the wild card era because the wild card was introduced in 1994. So that just because it was more than just the division winners that made the World Series, which I think is wonderful because it gives more teams hope. Why does it say Philadelphia over Toronto? That's a bug. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm staring at the AL. Yep, that is right. It was the Philadelphia Phillies. Beat the, Philadelphia Phillies beat the Toronto Blue Jays. My bad. So I think it's absurd to shake your finger at these players and call them awful, horrible people when there are players for them that did a lot worse. Ty Cobb was, forgive my French, a racist son of a bitch and motherfucking asshole that basically tried to kill somebody. We know this happened, and people still thought of Ty Cobb as one of the greatest baseball players that ever played the game. As a baseball player, he was fantastic. As a human being, he was a scumbag and a horrible, horrible person. And I could name you 100 other names not off the top of my head, I'd have to do some research, of just really terrible people that were amazing athletes. They all get celebrated, but we're going to sit here and look at a guy who is pretty okay. Like, for example, Rafael Palmeiro. Rafael Palmeiro tested positive for steroids. He was a very good baseball player and a pretty nice guy. And his name gets dragged through the mud because he used steroids. I mean, these are adults. They made a choice. Their choice is stupid, but they made a choice. And there's absolutely no evidence that these players are Hall of Famers because they use steroids. Baseball is more than just about athletics. It's about your ability to recognize a pitch. It's about your ability to hit the pitch. And it's the ability to, if you're a pitcher, outsmart the hitter. None of which steroids help you with. Steroids might help you hit the ball farther. We don't know for sure because they aren't legal. Steroids probably offer a benefit where that older players can work out and maintain muscle mass longer. They don't make a bad player into a Hall of Famer. They make marginal baseball players into major leaguers who get real money. Those were the people who, for the vast majority of the time, got caught using steroids. And so, it just seems so absurd to me. Sit there and look down your nose at a player and say, He cheated. Well, until the 90s, it wasn't actually against the rules to use steroids. That was added later. And everyone did it. Pitchers did it, hitters. If you talk to athletes, baseball players in this time frame, they will admit that they saw people doing the stuff. They might try to deny they did, but people were doing it. And I mean, they're adults. If they make a bad decision, that's fine. We can't stop them. But this idea that, we should exclude amazing players like Barry Bonds from the Hall of Fame because he might have maybe done steroids even though he never tested positive, is just silly. It's just silly. I apologize if you have a different opinion. I welcome healthy debate. But if you're going to start, if you decide you want to start trolling me on this stuff and whatever, then we'll have issues. It's not that big a deal. The only argument I've ever seen for not having PEDs or steroids of any kind in baseball is that little kids will see that, say, Barry Bonds, will see, Manny Ramirez tested positive for steroids. I want to be like Manny Ramirez because he's an amazing hitter. I might take steroids too. Steroids are an absolutely terrible idea for someone who isn't fully developed. I do not say this as a medical doctor. I do have a doctorate, but it's in history. Not in baseball history, by the way. But I've read enough books and stuff to know that it's an awful idea to have a child use steroids. And you should feel awful if you permit your child to do it. And there's lots of side effects for using steroids. I'm not saying using steroids is smart. But I am saying that making this huge deal that these players ruin the game is absolute, utter nonsense. The game was different. Scoring was super high. And for a long time, so after the new drug policy started to go into effect in the early 2000s, people like offense is going down and must be steroid users leaving the game. And then it started exploding again. I mean, just a couple of years ago in 2016, people started hitting home runs all over the bloody place. If we look at the home run leaderboard in the National League, there's like 2 guys who hit 50 that year. Sorry, 2 guys who hit 40. Who was the guy in 2016 that hit 50? Someone hit 50. Was it Mark Trumbo? Ha! I remembered. It was 47, not 50. Just last year, this year that just finished, Giancarlo Stanton hit over 50 home runs. Aaron Judge hit over 50 home runs. Someone else did too, whose name escapes me at the moment. Who else hit 50-plus homers last year? It was Aaron Judge, Giancarlo Stanton, and maybe Bryce Harper, but I don't think Bryce Harper got to 50. We're in another offensive era, and it's starting to level off a little bit, because in 2014, it was actually an amazing year for pitching. So, I mean, these things go in cycles. The important thing for your purposes as a member, as someone who plays out-of-the-park baseball, is to know, okay, I'm playing with all historical players that enter at random times. If it's 1922, do I want a Roger Clemens? Someone who strikes a lot of people out. Of course I do. But do I want somebody in 1922 that doesn't strike out a lot of pitchers? A marginal player who might not have been a Hall of Famer in 1995, but might be one in 1922. Because he pitches very well to contact and doesn't get hit very hard. Like a Derek Lowe, to pick a random name out of thin air. Derek Lowe was known for giving up a lot of ground balls, and sometimes he gave up home runs. It was a big problem for him. But if you put him in an era like the early 20s or the late teens, where offense wasn't as big, maybe that's not such a big deal. But there is one incontrovertible fact, one incontrovertible side of progress. The athletes of 2017 are superior to those of 1917. As much as you want to say Babe Ruth was an amazing baseball player, and he was an amazing baseball player, in a purely athletic sense, if Babe Ruth had faced the pitchers of today, he would not have hit as many home runs. If Barry Bonds had played when Babe Ruth did, he would have put up video game numbers. Like, So I played a long time ago. I played a game called Triple Play for the PlayStation. I think he had like 150 home runs with one person. I truly believe Babe Ruth would have hit 100, or Barry Bonds would have hit 150 home runs if you put him in this offensive era where no one else can hit home runs. Ballparks were smaller. Pitchers didn't throw as hard. Pitchers didn't know as many tricky pitches. There were no black players, so some of the best players in the country were arbitrarily excluded from the game. Context matters. And so when you're deciding which players you think are the best and which players you want to target for your team, keep in mind the context. And that was the main point I wanted to make about baseball history. Let's talk a little bit about one of my other favorite hobby horses. I apologize if this video seems ranty to you. It is a little bit ranty, and I fully accept that. I promise I won't be this bad in the future, but two of my biggest sticking points are steroid absurdities and the Hall of Fame. The Hall of Fame is probably a bit silly, but steroid use is one of the things I think is way overblown. The Baseball Hall of Fame opened its doors in 1936. Let's do Sortable Hall of Fame. There should be a category here for the year they were inducted. But there might not be. There is some, like, the plaques and stuff. Cy Young. We'll look up Cy Young. Was one of the very first people inducted in the Hall of Fame. 36. Oh, he didn't even make it the first year. Was Ty Cobb one of the first ones? Oh, voting history. Oh my god, this is amazing. I forgot they had this. This is the greatest thing ever. So 1936 was the inaugural very first class of baseball players to make the Major League Hall of Fame. Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, Christy Mathewson, Walter Johnson. If we're talking about all-time players, those are four of the very best. I think Ty Cobb, Babe Ruth, and Walter Johnson would have been amazing players in any era. Christy Mathewson was a bit of the product of the times. Christy Mathewson wrote a book called Pitching in the Pinch, where he said that the most important thing you need to do is pitch to contact, because even if someone pitches really, really badly, they're not going to give up these crazy things called home runs. So he would say, save your best stuff for the late innings, and that sounds wonderful, but you just can't do it anymore. The original standard was 75%, and it was that way for a very long time, except for this weird Charlie Gehringer situation in 1949. Because I think Charlie Gehringer died that year. There was some weird thing that happened that got him in when he was under 75%, and I don't remember why. And some years no one was elected. But so what would happen is you were given... so in order to be eligible for the Major League Hall of Fame, a baseball player must have played for at least 10 years and have been retired for 5. The idea being, you want to give people a bit of a break. So you can focus on truly what made the player great, and not necessarily whether he was popular at the time. And you have to get 75% of the vote or higher, except again for this weirdly Charlie Gehringer thing. There's a reason for it, I just don't remember what it was. And some of the very best people to ever play Major League Baseball are in the Hall of Fame. There's some very, very good people who aren't in the Hall of Fame who deserve to be there. But that's what baseball is about. It's about the Hall of Fame. And there are some very, very bad players who made it in the Hall of Fame. And it's because the process is a little bit stupid. For a very, very long time, the Baseball Writers Association of America was only given to newspaper writers, and once you got a ballot, you never lost it. So there would be someone who wrote for, let's say, the New York Times and covered the Dodgers, the Brooklyn Dodgers, we'll say. Covered the Dodgers for 5 years, and then never saw a baseball game again, and he would get a vote. And they would almost always vote based on name value. There would be newspaper writers But more importantly, it was just people that would pass the so-called eye test, but weren't actually that good. One of the earliest examples of this is Rabbit Moranville. Rabbit Moranville was an absolutely terrible offensive player. Just awful. And this is in an era where offense was actually pretty hard to come by. And he was just not very good at it. He got a lot of hits because the dude played for like 20 years. Sorry, 23 years. But people loved him. And most importantly, people thought he was great defensively. He wasn't, but people believed he was. And so a guy like Rabbit Moranville, who's not remotely qualified for the Hall of Fame, got 82% of the bloody vote. By the way, look how long he was on the ballot. Major League Baseball just changed their rules. It used to be you could be on the ballot for 15 years. Now you can only be on for 10. And that's kind of unfair. But it is what it is. If you look at these different standards, so the black ink Jaws is we just had it here. Okay, so it's their average of career WAR. So that's their average WAR per season plus the top 7 individual season WAR. So it's based toward peak. He's pretty bad at that. Black ink test. Number of times you lead the league in certain stats. He led the league one time in plate appearances. The only time he led the league in anything. Gray ink, top 10 in the league in certain stats. A little bit better, but still not great. HOF standards. It's designed to... It doesn't wait for peak like Jaws does. I think Jaws is the best way to tell if someone should be a Hall of Famer. But HOF standards is fine too. And HOF modern includes things like awards and stuff that they've won. He fails every single one of these by a pretty wide margin, and yet he got 82% of the vote because of campaigning. And because I think he was sick at the time, people felt sorry for him. So just some awful players have gotten into the Hall of Fame. And there's a lot of politics in it, and there's a lot of bullshit. There's a lot of deserving players who don't get in. Pete Rose was banned from the game for life for betting on baseball, which he admitted to doing, and he was a scumbag for doing it. But again, I think it's a little bit silly to say he can never play baseball again or be eligible for the Hall of Fame, even though he had the most hits in Major League history. Still has, actually, because Ichiro's only gets the most hits in history if you include his time in Japan. And Max Carey. There has never been a unanimous Hall of Famer in the history of Major League Baseball. Which is just silly. Because some people have definitely deserved it. I mean, when Cy Young retired, he led all of Major League Baseball in wins. And I know I said wins are a junk stat. But let me show you something here. There's junk stats, and there's obliterating the rest of the league in junk stats. To the point where you have to realize maybe this player was a little bit special. Let's look at career pitching for wins. Look, Cy Young, 511. Walter Johnson, 417. And it just goes down from there. 511 wins. Cy Young also, by the way, leads all-time in losses, too. 316. It turns out if you win a lot of games, you tend to lose a lot of games, too. I want to make a couple of cases, and this is just purely from my records. You can feel free, I've talked most about the OOTP stuff you need to know. Just basically keep in mind, when you're using historical players, keep in mind the record. And keep that in mind, too. If you see a player hitting 25 home runs in 1915, sign that player for 1,000 years. You see a player hitting 25 home runs in 2015, that's good. But it's not like, oh my god, this person is super elite. I want to talk about a handful of people who either are in the Hall of Fame and should be, or shouldn't be, or aren't in the Hall of Fame and shouldn't be. Let me talk about one of the career wins leaders, because I think this is a guy that gets really overlooked. Tommy John, 288 career wins. So if you follow Major League Baseball, you might know there are certain numbers that people consider automatic to get in the Hall of Fame. One of those numbers is 300. If you get 300 wins, you're in. Tommy John had 288 and didn't get in. It's silly. Tommy John was a very, very good pitcher for a very long time. He's comfortably within the margin of Jaws. He's pretty close on Hall of Fame standards. He would be a weaker Hall of Famer, but I think he deserves it for a very, very, very important reason. Tommy John surgery. Tommy John surgery is where you remove where if you tear an elbow ligament in your pitching arm, you remove the ligament from your other arm and put it in your pitching arm. It completely revitalized the game of baseball. If you tore this ligament, called the UCL, the ulnar collateral ligament, if you tore it, you were done. You would never play Major League Baseball again. You might not even be able to comb your hair ever again. And Tommy John's career looked really, really bad. And he is like, I want to keep playing baseball. Let me get this experimental surgery. He missed 1 year, 1975, and he came back and went 10-10 with a 3.09 ERA. And he got better in 77. He was having an amazing season as he got older, and it's all thanks to this surgery. It revitalized his career. It made him, in my opinion, a Hall of Famer. If he had not agreed to become the guinea pig and get this surgery, which could very well have cost him his career and even his ability to, say, lift a glass of water, who knows what would have happened. So many players today get the surgery, and it's so routine. And I think he deserves to be in the Hall of Fame for that reason. Barry Bonds is one of the very best baseball players to ever pick up a bat. He's not in the Hall of Fame because of a bullshit book called Game of Shadows, which people say Barry Bonds did steroids. And again, my response is twofold. One, he never tested positive. Two, who cares? Let me show something to you. Let me show you a leaderboard. Another leaderboard. And I want you to tell me this baseball player does not belong in the Hall of Fame. Forget the steroid nonsense. It doesn't matter. Career WAR is Ty Cobbs, Babe Ruth, Ted Williams, Tris Speaker, Willie Mays, Stan Musial, Honus Wagner, Hank Aaron, Barry Bonds, number 9 all time. Barry Bonds, career leader in walks, career leader in home runs. And walks are far more impressive, by the way, because he beat Rickey Henderson by 400. And Rickey Henderson played longer than Barry Bonds did. Barry Bonds holds single-season records for slugging percentage, for on-base percentage, for OPS, for home runs in a season, for walks in a season. Barry Bonds is quite possibly the best offensive baseball player in human history. And yet he's not in the Hall of Fame because of this nonsense book. I'm not saying Barry Bonds wasn't using steroids. I bet he probably was. The book pretty clearly proves that. So in that sense, it's not a nonsense book. But the idea that you can sit here and kind of say, oh, he's a terrible player. He doesn't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. He's a dirty, rotten cheater. Well, there's Hall of Famers that threw spitballs, even after they were illegal. There's Hall of Famers who use amphetamines. There's Hall of Famers who use cocaine. There's Hall of Famers who got drunk every bloody night. You expect to tell me that Barry Bonds is a scumbag and all these people are human beings of the finest caliber. It's bullshit. And that's the last time I'll complain about that particular hobby horse. Roger Clemens, same boat. He's a pitcher instead of a hitter. Easily one of the best players of all time, not in the Hall of Fame because reasons. Then there's the more marginal cases, and some that are not by any means marginal. Let's talk about Lou Whitaker and Bobby Grich, both of whom play second base, and neither of whom is in the Hall of Fame. Which is just silly, because both were amazing players. If we look at wins above replacement, Larry Doyle's a weird case. Let's see, where's Lou Whitaker, 13, Bobby Grich, 19. Everyone above them is in the Hall of Fame. Chase Utley is not, because he hasn't retired yet in real life, and he actually should be, in my opinion, as well. I don't know what this whole Larry Doyle situation is. Jeff Kent isn't in, and I'll be pretty honest, because he was an asshole. No one liked Jeff Kent. And that's another thing that'll get you penalized in the Hall of Fame voting. If you were a jerk of a player, people generally won't vote for you. Unless you were so amazing that they can't justify it. It is what it is. So those are the ones I mainly want to talk about. Shoeless Joe. Yeah, I mean, he kind of deserved to be in there, but at the other time, he kind of didn't too. He was banned from baseball. That means banned from the Hall of Fame. And he was banned for a better reason, because he actually took action and accepted bribes. We don't have any evidence that that Pete Rose ever did that. But, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, it seems a little bit silly to get worked up over stuff like this. But I just think it's so unfair that people just... They let in someone like Jack Morris. Jack Morris is, like, average. Jack Morris's ERA plus is 105, which means his... And for his entire career, he was 5% better than the average pitcher. Is that a Hall of Famer to you? It's not a Hall of Famer to me. He won a lot of games because he pitched on some pretty decent teams that scored lots and lots of runs. I don't see why he should get credit for that. But, you know, whatever. I kind of ended this one on a bit of a down note. I actually love the history of baseball. I think it's so fascinating. And I think the best stories are stories of individual players. There's just so many colorful people in baseball. And they did so many amazing things. Ricky Henderson always spoke about himself in the third person. He would brag he'd do all these crazy things no one would believe he would do, and then he'd do them. Someone like Satchel Paige, who came up with all these brilliant sayings that are, you know, so funny. He used to say, don't eat fried foods because they'll angry up the blood. I don't know what that means, but he said it. Players like Ichiro Suzuki, who comes from Japan, speaks no bloody English, and ends up being one of the greatest baseball players we've ever had. Ichiro Suzuki is a Hall of Famer, and there's no question that Ichiro Suzuki is a Hall of Famer. He's number 2 all-time in hits. It probably won't show that here. Oh, no, actually, he's not quite number 2 all-time in hits. Because they don't include his time in Japan. But I mean, Ichiro Suzuki hit over 3,000 hits. It's just stupid. If we include all levels, I wonder if this will include his... No, it doesn't include his... It doesn't include his Japanese hits. That's kind of a shame. He has the all-time record for hits, 262 hits in a single season. His rookie year, he won both the MVP and the Rookie of the Year award, which is, again, just insane. Ted Williams, one of the best players to ever play baseball, was a hero to his country, fought in World War II. Warren Spahn fought in World War II, got a Purple Heart. These are some amazing and incredible human beings that happen to play baseball. And there's some assholes, too. No one's going to say they like Ty Cobb. He was just a racist jackass that nobody liked. Deservedly so. I mean, I do not shed a single tear for people that dislike Ty Cobb. He was a monster. But that doesn't mean he wasn't a great baseball player. And just knowing who was good and who wasn't good will help you if you play historical baseball. I hope you enjoyed this little look at baseball history. It ended up being a little more negative than I intended it to be. I'm still a little bit angry that Marvin Miller didn't get in the Hall of Fame on the Veterans Committee. The Veterans Committee, by the way, is a very stupid addition to the game that basically said, these people should have been in the Hall of Fame. Let's put them in the Hall of Fame. Let's let a bunch of old guys and let people like Joe Morgan campaign for all his buddies from the 1970s Reds, and a lot of them don't deserve to be in the Hall of Fame. And other examples as well. But that will conclude the episode. I hope you've enjoyed this look at baseball history. If you have any questions or just want to share your favorite stories, I invite you to do so in the comments. I hope you liked. If you did like the video, subscribe. And until next time, this has been Avindian, and I bid you good day.